First off, Craig, thank you for joining us. Let's jump right into it. You are announcing a significant ad rollout this week. How did you determine in this who to target and where to target them?
So the who to target, we're starting from the idea that we want to reach the people who voted for Nikki Haley in the primaries, Republicans and independents, particularly, of course, in the swing states, and other what I would call like-minded center-right voters. So we have used a great deal of research capacity to identify those voters, both based on their sort of ideological preferences and also their geography. Simply where they live is adjacent to where those votes were counted in the primary elections. Our focus is going to be on the blue wall states, initially Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. We'll be reaching a total of approximately 2.6 million voters in those areas, including 1.5 million just in Pennsylvania. With Pennsylvania being, the acknowledged sort of tipping point potentially for the Electoral College this year, we're going to focus our resources there. So we are targeting these folks both, I would say, sort of demographically and geographically, and will be available to them wherever they go on the internet.
And so when we look at the focus on the blue wall states and specifically Pennsylvania, what in your research led you to this area in particular, beyond the fact that it is such a key swing state this electoral cycle?
Well, we think that there are many voters who will be receptive to our message. And we know that there are more of them out there, potentially a lot more of them, in fact, than the likely margin of the victory that's going to happen for one of the two candidates come November the 5th. Pennsylvania was decided in 2016 by only 40,000 votes approximately, and about 80,000 votes in 2020. But there were 158,000 Haley voters in the primary, and we believe there are at least another 150,000, perhaps more, who are like-minded. So if you have a universe being even somewhat conservative, you have a universe of about 300,000 potentially persuadable voters. And you know that the outcome is going to be determined by less than 100,000 voters. We think we're in good shape to be an important factor, certainly not the only factor, but an important factor in determining the outcome of the race. Our goal is to have somewhere between 25 and 40% of these center-right voters make the decision to vote for Vice President Harris. And we think we can do that. And we think that if we achieve that goal, then we help win these states for the vice president and therefore win the presidency.
And tell me about the messaging you're using in these ads to target these voters in particular, because it seems like there's a significant focus on the economy, fiscal responsibility, and the vice president's prosecutorial background. How did you land at these messages specifically?
So there are lots of other groups, obviously, that are operating in this complicated election context, and we think that they are focusing on talking to voters about what they would argue are flaws and problems with Donald Trump. We think that's being done plenty, and we think that the voters that we're trying to talk to already know that. And then, in fact, that's one of the reasons why they supported Nikki Haley. So the question is, how do you get folks who don't like Donald Trump, but who may have never voted for a Democrat for president in their lives, to come over and vote for the vice president, to kind of cross that last bridge? And the answer, we believe, and what our research has shown, is that you demonstrate with facts that the vice president is a member of the American center. She may be center left, and these voters may be center right, but the key is that they can meet in the center and find some common ground, and particularly on major issues like fiscal responsibility and closing the border, being tough on crime. These are all things that are facts about the vice president's record, and we believe that a lot of these voters may not know them, they may not hear them from right-wing media. When they're exposed to these facts, what our research shows is that when they're exposed to these facts, it has a measurable effect on their vote behavior and getting them to be willing to cast that vote for a Democrat for president where they may never have done it before.
And when it comes to, for instance, the issue of the economy, polling still shows that former President Donald Trump polls favorably pretty significantly on this issue. So what in your messaging in these ads gives you confidence that it could move the needle here for some of these voters?
So we think that what that polling reflects is a kind of nostalgia for 2019. All Americans, all of us went through an incredible trauma between 2020 and 2021, the pandemic once in a century kind of event. And there is a nostalgia for the way things were, or the way that we remember them as being before the pandemic. But the facts are, and we present these facts in our advertising, is that Donald Trump's current plan for a national sales tax would have an enormous inflationary effect, and his plan for huge additional tax cuts would have an enormous deficit effect. So these voters, our voters, don't want higher prices. They don't want to be closed off from the option of buying the things that they buy in the stores now. And they don't want the deficit, which is already too large, to be blown even further wide open. So when you tell them those facts about the Trump plan, it has an impact. And then the other side of that, of course, is that the vice president's plan is different. It has been scored by all major economists to have a much more beneficial effect in terms of the deficit as compared to Trump. Yes, there would be tax cuts, but they would be focused on the middle class as opposed to on the wealthiest Americans. So again, our campaign is really an educational campaign as much as an advocacy campaign. We think when you show these voters these basic facts, that it gets them to make what we believe is the right decision.
How many voters are you anticipating reaching with these ads? And I know you said, there's a heavy focus on the blue wall states. Walk me through what the rollout looks like geographically here.
Yes. So we are concentrating, initially at least, on Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. We are targeting 1.5 million people in Pennsylvania, voters in Pennsylvania. We're targeting 600,000 in Michigan and 400,000 in Wisconsin. Again, those are numbers that are way in excess of what we would need to be successful in persuasion in order to have a big effect on the outcome of those states. Our voters will see the advertising when they're on social media, Meta, and so on, when they are streaming on services like Max, when they are on YouTube, and importantly, although it may sound sort of counterintuitive, importantly, when they're on gaming systems, because that is a place where people actually pay a lot of attention to advertising.
And what about the Sun Belt states? Is there a plan to eventually introduce this this digital ad campaign to the voters there as well?
So I should say that even from the beginning, we will be running in the Sun Belt states, just at lower numbers of targets. You'll be talking about tens of thousands as opposed to hundreds of thousands in the beginning. As our fundraising continues, we'd like to expand those numbers, but we will have a presence in the other swing states, the Sun Belt states, from the very beginning.
And given that the name of this group is Haley Voters for Harris, and you have former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, who, over the summer threw her support behind Trump, how do you overcome her endorsement of that and your guys' messaging with this?
Look, what our research has shown is that the vast majority of the voters that we're going to be speaking to have respect for Governor Haley. If she had been the nominee of the Republican Party, they probably would have voted for her in overwhelming numbers. But she's not. And they believe that she's entitled to her decision about who to endorse. But it does not dictate their decision. These are independent-minded voters. Clearly, they've already proven that in their primary behavior. They're going to make up their own mind. I think a lot of them believe that her decision to endorse President Trump is based on her personal desires to have a bigger place in the Republican Party in the future. And that's not something they care about as voters. They care about making the right decision in 2024. For the country and for their families.
And it struck me in these ads, a lot of the people talking in this are what the ads label as lifelong Republicans or conservatives or previous Trump voters. How did you determine that these messengers were the best messengers for this?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because I think the messengers are in some ways equally important to the message itself. The Harris campaign has been making a concerted effort to reach out and to try to build a coalition with center-right voters and Republicans. But it's still a Democratic campaign talking to Republicans. What we're doing is having fellow Republicans, fellow conservatives, people with long credentials in the party in many cases, speaking to their friends, their neighbors, their peers. People like community. They like to feel that they're not alone, that they're part of a group. And this, I think, sends that exact signal. They can, I think, when these voters see our ads, they can see themselves in those ads and in those folks, and they can say, "Look, I may not have voted for a Democrat before, but I see people who think like me, and they're going to do it. I can do it too."